Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have, I think, an exciting show tonight. And it's mostly to do with Canada, but not all Canada, and you'll understand that in just 1 second here. In a few minutes, I have a friend of the show and a personal friend, Jordan Bonaparte, UFO investigator of today. Then that's Chris Rutkowski. He's coming on at 25 minutes into the show. I want to thank everyone that supports the show. And I also want to thank every listener. I don't do that enough. There are all different types of ways to listen. You can catch us live on YouTube or live on KGRA Radio. Plus, there's a lot of other platforms. There's our podcast, of course, which you can get on your media player. And every Thursday night, we're over at the Dark Matter Digital Network. I'm not sure exactly what time it is on Thursday, but there is a schedule. So check that out over there at some point. And a few days ago, the anchor to the show, the anchor show that is, on the network, and that's Art Bell's old show, Midnight in the Desert, they got a new host, and his name is Tim Weisberg. Nice guy. And so you can check out the shows. Anyone can actually watch or listen to the shows, I should say, over there at the Dark Matter Digital Network, Midnight in the Desert. That's every night, and that is on Eastern Time. It's midnight to the wee hours in the morning, or Pacific Time, it's 9 p.m. So check that over at the Dark Matter Digital Network. And for right now, all that being said, I would like to introduce that new host, Tim. Welcome to the show. Surprise guest.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's nice to be able to talk about stuff this early and not have to wait till midnight.
Yes, you are, you're not in Canada. I said this was a Canada show, but you're close enough. You're in Massachusetts. And
Pretty close.
Yeah. So you have to stay up late to do the show. I don't know if I could do that, to be honest with you. Those hours are and what time do you I guess you have to reset your whole life, but you get to bed at, 4 in the morning or something like that?
Yeah, I try to go to bed. I leave my day job around, a little bit after this, go home, take a nap, wake up, do the show, then go and take another 3 or 4 hour nap, get up, go to work.
Oh, my goodness.
So far, it's working out so far, but we're only in week 2. Talk to me in a couple of months.
Yeah, I've been a subscriber all the way back when Art Bell first came back. I think it was 2015 or something like that. But our show, I do believe, is the longest running show. Because of Keith over there, he helped me go live for the very first time, and I've been live ever since. And I think that was 2013. We've been running on that network, and we get quite a few listeners there on Thursday night, even though it's a rerun. So it's well done, and you have Michelle helping you, getting guests, and I know you have a good week coming up. But before we get into that, I want to quickly say that I just listened this evening before the show on the episode you did about the coronavirus, and I know it has absolutely nothing to do with UFOs, and not really paranormal, but there is so much hype about it, and the guest you had, what was her name?
Dahlia Schweitzer.
Yeah, she was very good. And, you kind of put a lot of things to bed. For instance, a lot more people die from the flu and it just does not make any news. And there's so much hype about this. People are wearing masks everywhere. I'm up in Maine, and I went into physical therapy today. And at the office, they said, have you been exposed to anyone with the coronavirus? I mean, it's really overblown, and so I was glad you did an episode about that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess abundance of caution is the phrase to use, but in actuality, it's the people who are dying from this. It's not healthy, average people. It's people that are at the extremes, very young people, very old people, and always when that happens, you tend to get the hype and the horror stories that come out because the media likes to sensationalize things. So we try to kind of peel back some of that and get into not only the truth of this virus, but just the way that they cover viruses in general.
Yeah. So you are doing shows on all different types of subjects like that has always been covered there, starting with Art Bell's shows. But can you give our listener here a little bit of your background and how you were able to fill Art Bell's seat?
Well, I don't know about that, but we started doing my original radio show, which is now in its 14th year, is Spooky South Coast. We started that in 2006, and that was something where, we didn't expect to get a big audience. We thought it'd just be a local regional show, but then we started podcasting, and that made all the difference in the world. And then when the Dark Matter Digital Network started up, Keith reached out and wanted to carry the show. He said that he and Art felt like it was something that kind of fit the mold of what Art was doing. And so we've been on there ever since then. And then when Dave Schrader took over Midnight in the Desert and he needed to have some fill-in hosts, I was one of the people lucky enough to get that opportunity. And then I kind of just became, I guess, the Jay Leno to his Johnny Carson, where I was usually the guy that they called first, and more often than not I could do it. And then it just made sense with his schedule now with Holzer Files going into a season 2 and everything on his plate. It just made sense for me to kind of step into the big chair.
Awesome. Well, if you ever need a fill-in, I'd be glad to do that.
Hey, we'll keep you on the list.
All right.
I did promise Dave I would use him first, though.
Absolutely. Yeah, Dave is awesome. Dave does such a great show, but he is such a busy guy. Plus, doesn't he have like 10 kids or something like that? I mean, he has a lot of children.
Something like that. And now his kids are having kids. Oh, man. And he just got a dog, so good luck with that.
Yeah. No. He does a wonderful job. And but anyway, I'm really glad that you were able to come on and just introduce yourself. I wish you all the luck. I hope it goes really well for you over there. And
thank you.
And just enjoy yourself because you're going to have some great guests as always there. All right.
That's what it's all about. Just have some fun late at night. That's what it's all about.
That's right. Yeah. Now it's time for you to go get a nap if you can.
I will do that. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. You take care.
You too.
All right. Our next guest, we have Jordan. And Jordan there he is. Da-da-da. Hey, Jordan. How are you?
How you doing, Martin?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for being on. Hey, what happened to your microphone setup? You're using your iPhone stuff here.
Oh, and it's the kids are upstairs screaming, and if I have a good enough mic, you're going to hear gosh knows what. So I figured this is like kind of the security against that.
I got it. You're hiding in the basement or something like that.
Yeah.
So you are up in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We met over at Shag Harbor. How many years? I don't even want to think how many years ago that was now.
Yeah, I don't like thinking of time passing. That was like that was 2 or 3 years ago. Although it feels like 2 months ago, if that.
Yeah.
But it's it was time goes by fast. I've been to some of the other festivals there since then. Shag Harbor got their own coin since you were last there.
That's right. And are they doing that event every year now?
Yeah, and I met with Chris Stiles, who's the ufologist who's kind of take on a lot of the planning. He claims that this year is going to be bigger and better than ever. So it's still a while away, another, I guess, 10 months from now or 8 months from now. So I'm sure you'll hear about it. Hopefully he'll find a way to get you up there again.
Well, I'll tell you, I did something I will never, ever do again, is I drove from Maine, from my house, all the way up around the arm of Nova Scotia. Stopped in where Stan Friedman lived, and then just drove all the way around. I think it was 2 days of driving or something ridiculous, when I could have just taken the ferry and just popped right over.
Yeah, exactly. And then you lost your credit card along the way.
Oh, that's right. That was a lot of fun. A dog bit me. My own dog bit me.
You're walking around the UFO festival asking for handouts.
Yeah,
I swear I got money.
I had that. I had the little basket and the sunglasses. I tried, but yeah. So hey, thanks for joining us, and we're on for another 15 minutes or so. Yeah. And I asked you if you could look up a little bit of UFO news. What's going on? So what did you find?
Well, I got a few things. Some that lean a bit more towards the controversial, and some that lead more towards the topic of disclosure. So I think maybe we'll start with that. And there's been an announcement that the Ministry of Defense in the UK has announced that they're going to release basically what they're referring to as their secret UFO files. And it sounds like anyone who's done a lot of kind of research into the Canadian UFO history, basically, the Canadian government has a section of their website where they store all of the UFO files or any reports related to UFOs basically wide open for public consumption. I can't think of the web address, but if you search like Canada government UFO, you'll find the division of the Canadian government's website that shares that. It sounds like the Ministry of Defence in the UK is going to do something similar, which was basically creating a portal on the government website to release, I guess, whatever they're able to. But by the sounds of what they've said so far, it's going to be an abundance of documents spanning 1950 to 2009. So I think the people who are watching the skies are going to have a lot of watching the computer screen and flipping through PDFs for a while. But I just find like what I like about something like this is, for one, is it gets the topic in the news because it gives something really interesting to talk about, but also it just kind of adds to the acceptance of the phenomenon to hear the government, even in a tongue-in-cheek way, tackling the topic and releasing the data. So I think it's great news and fascinating stuff.
That's right. And just another thing moving things along, as it seems, huh?
Yeah, and it's, that's been, like, since I started kind of following the UFO world, the idea of disclosure and the government finally admitting, what's been going on and the secret they've been hiding, it's just been, slowly it's been inching along. But I feel like in the last year or two, things have really been moving. The American government has said a whole lot of stuff that, X-Files kind of predicted they would, I guess. But it's the American government has said a lot. The Canadian government has never been that secretive about it and their interest in it. But I think what else is interesting is lately is you're seeing a lot of private researchers really opening the doors to their work. So, of course, when Stanton Friedman passed, rest in peace, Stanton, a wealth of UFO documents were released, and I don't know if he gave it to a university, but I believe the plan is they're going to organize it and allow access to it. And I don't know if many kind of UFO researchers of yesteryears have done things like that, have really like publicly shared their life's work, basically. And I think that's just another step in uncovering what the heck is going on up there.
Interesting. I know. I think someone did that with photographs, and I don't want to get the name wrong, so I'm not going to bring it up. But I think they gave their like legacy of big photograph collection over to, I think Open Minds may have had purchased that or something. I'm not really sure exactly what happened. But
yeah, what I like with, like, say, what Stanton's done is it's not even just a selection of his work or his research. It's basically, the way I understand it, is it's like a truckload of documents and books and hard drives with data of God knows what. And it's just, like, I would love to be the person who is in charge of going through that. Like, I guess the archivist who goes through and organizes that. Because I'm sure there's some really interesting things in there that even Stanton probably forgot he uncovered back in, the 60s or something.
Sure. Yeah, I know Dave Marler, who's going to be on the show coming up in a couple of weeks, has quite a library going in the States, down in the Albuquerque area. So he is really, conserving a lot of files, and they're eventually going to go to a university there. So, yeah. And I love when universities get things because, one thing, it's going to be extremely well taken care of.
Exactly, and and students, curious minds are going to have access to that stuff.
Open to everyone. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. We won't steal his thunder because he's going to talk about it, but this topic is absolutely perfect for your guest, Chris Rutkowski, right. Because anyone who goes on Google and searches UFOs, you're in the last 3-4 weeks or so, you're going to find articles about him opening the doors of his, in Canada, he's the guy. People call him the Canadian UFO guy, and even that is understating it. Like him opening the doors to his collection and sharing it is, I can't even express how amazing that is for people who are interested in this topic.
Yeah, speaking of that, we do have a blog that's in the show notes that has to do all with that collection that I'm going to be talking to Chris about. We also have a new blog up. These blogs are written by Charles Lear, who writes for the show. We have another blog up called UFOs Over Canada. It's kind of a broad brushstrokes of a number of different UFO incidents in Canada. All the good famous ones, Falcon Lake and all that.
Who is writing that?
Oh, that's Charles Lear. He writes for the show.
Okay.
Once a week, but we put out a blog. Yeah.
Okay, and that's okay. I thought it was like an ongoing blog. That's like one post is about the
Yeah.
Canada UFO events. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Kinda.
have some real interesting ones. I'm sure Chris is going to get into it, but people who watch your show internationally outside of Canada, they probably don't know about the Falcon Lake UFO event, and that's Chris is kind of the guy in telling that story, and that story and his work in maintaining the legacy of that story is going to blow your listeners' minds when he gets into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to get into that because that's another fascinating one. I'm going to also mention that I think someone has wrote me a while back saying that was all a hoax, and I just want to hear what his thoughts are on that as well.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, yeah. So you said earlier you had did I hear you say something about some dirt or something like that?
Well, not dirt. I said it's just a controversial topic, and it's like I'm sure if we even bring this up, people in the comments are probably going to tell me to go back to Canada or some awful thing like that. But I'm sure you're aware of this. But there's been a lot of drama surrounding the man behind the YouTube channel Secure Team.
10.
His name is
Secure Team 10.
Tyler. Yeah, Secure Team 10.
Yeah.
And of course, like anyone who follows this topic is aware that there's a lot of debate about if it's all him creating hoax videos as a way to, gain money and promote himself or whatever. And that's a topic neither of us can figure out. But with the big, or neither of us probably care to get into that. But
yeah,
the big kind of controversy right now is he was criminal charges laid against him. He was arrested and charged with driving while intoxicated. But shortly after the arrest, I guess his channel went silent for a bit, and then he came back with a video basically denying it and claiming in no uncertain terms that he's the victim of basically a setup and a cover-up. Did you see the video? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, someone sent it to me, so I did happen to watch it. Yeah, I mean, if he's got some type of issues, it's we don't want to. Get into that. But anyway, it's I don't have any problem though talking about his videos because not all of them, but a lot of them are CGI, and a lot of them are hoaxes. And he has 2 million or so subscribers to his channel. That's a money machine right there. So,
and it makes us all look bad because
that's right.
His channel has a huge reach, and often when I'm in kind of a mixed company, if it ever comes up, my interest in the UFO phenomenon, it's very common that someone will say, I see video, there's a guy on YouTube named Secure Team 10, his videos are crazy, and it's, and so the public is kind of their first interaction with the phenomenon beyond fiction, like a movie, hopefully isn't, but maybe, a Secure Team 10 video. And that's kind of sad.
Well, I've said a few times on this show, and I don't, I do get a lot of backlash for any calling out that I do, but I want the person that is just getting interested in the topic, that will go online and want to look at UFOs. I don't want them to see fakes. There's plenty out there that isn't, and there's been plenty of sightings that aren't fake. And for someone to get tainted, right away, there's a third phase of the moon and this site, and and not all of the videos are fraudulent, but a lot of them are. And there's no, we're in the Wild West here. There's no way to regulate something like that. So it's a viewer beware type of thing. And it's kind of like in the art world, we say that everything is guilty till proven innocent, and that's kind of how you have to look at a UFO video is try to find something wrong with it. And there was one recently, I don't know what channel it was on, but whoever posted it said that there were, and it was pretty darn good looking too, if you ask me, and whoever posted it said there were hundreds of witnesses, but there were no other videos, and there was no other mention of who the witnesses were. And, so, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a guy on I follow him on Facebook and YouTube, and I think he's almost like the kryptonite to Secure Team. I don't know if you ever heard of him. His name is Scott Brando, but he uses I think he's Italian, and his channel and name on Twitter is UFO of Interest, and basically his whole purpose, I guess, with his social media channel is to debunk hoaxers. And he does a
Huh.
really good job at, like, what he'll do is if there's ever anything in the media or in the news of a viral video going around, or if Secure Team posts something, he's very quick to find kind of like the artwork maybe that they are manipulating and animating to make it look as a UFO video. Or he's really good at tracing the history of a viral video to figure out who first posted it, and who changed it or added a story to it to exaggerate it more. But if you've never seen this guy, you should look him up. Again, it's Scott Brando's UFO of Interest. And actually, Martin, I think if you checked him out, you'd probably think of him as a good guest for your show. He really knows his stuff.
Well, I had a gal on my show years ago, and she used to call herself Sheila Aliens. And I don't know whatever happened to her, but she was doing basically the same thing. She was going through and debunking and calling people out, and she was really doing a pretty good job at it. And,
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to be self-policing when it comes to this, because, we have to watch out for the people getting interested in this, because otherwise they'll just think it's all, a big hoax, and there's so much really going on.
Yeah, it's a delicate topic too. It's because it's so vague, and it's so much is left to belief and whatnot, that it's really hard. The barrier to entry is very very hefty, because you really got to know what to look at and what to look for to really understand it as you come in. And all it takes is somebody with a big voice that's just spewing nonsense to really throw things off.
I haven't mentioned this yet, but for the person that's first time that's actually heard you on this show, you and I met, of course, quite a while ago. You were listening to this show, and we connected. But can you? We have just a couple minutes here. Can you tell them about your wonderful podcast that I actually listen to? I listen to a handful of podcasts, and yours is one of them, and
Awesome.
find it very enjoyable.
Yeah, my show is called Nighttime. I cover Canadian crime, mysteries, strange stories. Like, kind of the way I see it is I just try to find interesting things from Canadian history and basically do like an audio documentary or like a radio documentary to share the story. So sometimes it's a missing person, sometimes it's a UFO event. And I've done quite a bit of UFO centric episodes. So I think listeners of your show, if they just search Nighttime on Apple Podcasts, or go to nighttimepodcast.com, or find my channel on YouTube, which is just Nighttime Pod, you'll find some cool UFO stories that you're probably unaware of, because again, I'm covering Canadian topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Someone just wrote in the chat room that UFO Interest has been at this for 6 years, it looks like.
Wow. Yeah,
So,
he really impressed me, that guy, Scott Brando.
yeah. So what do you have for shows coming up? You had, I was trying to think of the ones recently. The one you had where people's houses got fried in the inside, all the wiring. And
Yeah,
everything. That was bizarre.
The
But
Bell Island boom.
yeah.
Bell Island is a small island in Newfoundland, and it basically was some kind of aerial explosion, basically an explosion in the sky that caused all sorts of anomalous electrical activity. So I did a 3-part series on that, where part 1 was just discussing the event and going through kind of the news archives. The second part was breaking it down a bit further with the hosts of the Astonishing Legends podcast, which are two guys that I partner with a lot. And then the third part was I met with and interviewed. She was a young woman living in the home at the time that is seen as ground zero, but I interviewed her now as an older lady still living in the house. And for anyone who hasn't heard a Newfoundland accent, if you listen to that episode, you'll hear something really unique.
Right.
But
hey, Jordan, we got to go to break. So, hey, thanks so much. I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me, Martin. Say hi to Chris for me.
I will. And we'll be right back. We're going to a real break here, and we'll be right back with our guest, Chris Rutkowski. Welcome back. we have Chris Rutkowski. I have a hard time with that name. I'm sorry, Chris. How are you?
That's all right.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on the show. It's been a long time. Last time we kind of hung out a little bit here and there out in Phoenix. How many years ago was that?
Oh boy, was that 2016 or earlier than that? I can't even remember now.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, I am excited to have you on the show for a lot of reasons. But for the person that doesn't know who you are, can you give a little bit of your background and what got you interested in this amazing topic? I think it's amazing.
Oh well, goes back a few years. I started investigating UFOs back in the 70s, if you can believe that.
Wow.
One of my mentors was Alan Hynek himself. He had come up to Canada as part of an investigation of his on some UFOs that were seen up in Manitoba in 1975. Got to know him back then. Actually, I formed what was then called the Manitoba Center for UFO Studies, and that progressed into the ufology research of Manitoba, and now simply ufology research over the years. I've been investigating for quite a few years. My background is in astronomy and education. I have degrees in astronomy and education. I've traveled widely investigating, published many papers and books on the subject. I'm probably best known for two things. One is the annual Canadian UFO survey, which looks at all the UFO reports that were filed in Canada in a single year. We're actually in our 31st year of doing this.
Wow.
Which, yeah, wow, for me too. And the other thing, I think people have probably seen me probably on some shows like Unsolved Mysteries and a few others talking about the Falcon Lake UFO case of 1967, which reopened as a cold case in the 1980s, and just recently published a book called When They Appeared with co-author Stan Michalak, who is the son of the primary witness. And we tell the story of what really happened back then when they appeared, not talking about they meaning aliens necessarily, but the family was taken aback when the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Royal Canadian Air Force, UFO investigators, curiosity seekers all descended on their small home in the city of Winnipeg after word got out that Mr. Stefan Michalak had encountered what was described as a flying saucer, a Hollywood-style flying saucer, about an hour north of the American border. The case has been one of the best ones on record anywhere around the world. So it's I've been investigating things recently, and then looking into some of the older stuff too, because out of some of the old cases, you can find some real treasures.
Absolutely. And I do want to talk about the Falcon Lake case in depth a little bit later on. But first, before we go there, do you ever have any earthquakes in Canada?
Oh, absolutely, earthquakes in Canada.
Well, I'm just looking behind you. I see those big bowling balls up on the top shelf.
Oh, yes,
Are those real bowling balls?
Star globe and a moon globe, actually.
Oh, okay.
It's the astronomy thing.
Well,
plus some of my book.
Yeah. Well, we'll hope they're secure up there. Yeah.
Yeah, we've and actually one of the other things I've produced was a detailed paper on the tectonic strain theory. Michael Persinger, who his name might not be familiar to some people, but he was a researcher in physiological psychology and experiential psychology who believed that earthquakes were related to UFOs, dating back to related to what John Deere in the upper Midwest was studying and so forth, and suggested that people across North America were seeing UFOs that were actually energy emissions from very, very minor earthquakes that jumped into the sky from cracks that eventually erupted.
Yeah, the earthquake lights. So yeah, I've definitely heard about them, which is really fascinating. I wanted to, I think it's great, first of all, that you're an astronomer and then you have an interest in this, because, a lot of people will say things like, oh, no astronomers are going to be interested in the UFO topic, or, it would hurt their career or all that. Have you ever had any negative things happen to you because you have an interest in UFOs as well?
I wouldn't say negative necessarily. Certainly, some of my colleagues looked askance at me when I took an interest in UFOs. In fact, I got into the UFO thing because, as an undergraduate student in astronomy, my professors were insistent that UFOs were nonsense, and the people who see them are a little touched in the head, or they're just seeing spots before their eyes, or something like that. And in the 1970s, there was a fairly significant flap, and in fact developed into a wave. And the calls started coming into the astronomy department, and my professors were getting a little bit flustered and annoyed at all these people who were interrupting their serious research with their UFO stories. And I sort of jumped in and said, well, you know what? Why don't you just give the calls to me? Because my office is right around the corner from yours, and I'll be glad to talk to these people. I thought I would suck up to the profs, try and get on their good side. So I started talking with the people who were calling, and by golly, these people didn't sound crazy. They simply were seeing some things that were very unusual, and I could explain a great many of them. But there were some cases that I just wasn't sure what they were. And over the years, I became, the guy who was given the UFO reports over the course of time.
Isn't that something? Amazing how one little turn in the road can just change your whole life like that. That's amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I know we're going to be doing this show on UFOs, but the dark matter and dark energy. I had Seth Shostak on, I don't know, a few months ago, and he was saying, give me some UFO evidence, and I said, give me some dark matter evidence, and but you're saying there's plenty out there that shows that dark matter exists, but we don't really know for sure. I mean, I eventually I'd like to talk to someone, an astronomer, about dark matter, because we're assuming something is there by the way galaxies behave, and but maybe there's something about gravity that we don't understand, or isn't there a lot of other possibilities besides an actual matter that's causing these things to happen?
Well, I mean, my astrophysics courses were quite a few years ago, but the problem with dark matter and the galaxies and the universe itself is that we're not seeing the right number, the right amount of material that's required to keep the universe moving the way it is, and they're suggesting that there's some matter that we simply don't see because it's hidden in galaxies and it's hidden in various other ways. So the problem of dark matter isn't an insignificant one, but I mean there's many other issues in astronomy and astrophysics that are curious. There's a colleague of mine at the university who studies magnetars, neutron stars that are so dense that they're basically giant magnets, hundreds and thousands of kilometers across, that are doing some very strange things to other stars and to matter in the universe. So there are some amazing things out there, and it's why I got into astronomy, because there are some great mysteries. It's the type of thing you can just lie on your back and look up, and it gives you a completely different perspective when you can put all of that behind you and see what's going on in the universe.
Not to get too far off the UFO topic, but I've heard that there's, the theory of the multiverse fits in nicely with all that.
Well, Spider-Man especially, I think, is right on with that.
Okay.
I mean, there's no question that there's all sorts of great theories about multiverses and multi-dimensions and parallel universes and all that sort of stuff. And I hear it all a lot in ufology. And the problem is that it is just speculation. I mean, we don't have any evidence that these things exist. And even just saying that, the UFO popped into another dimension, well, that's a little flippant, because the science behind that is simply science fiction at this point. We don't have any way of even conceiving of how that could be done. We know that there are other dimensions. You may have heard the fact that there's 11 dimensions inside of every atom, but on the macro scale, what we got are these 4 that we are very familiar with. So we have to deal with what we have. And right now, I like talking a little bit more of the nuts and bolts, even though I know the latest thing in ufology is consciousness, and who knows where that goes.
Have you yourself ever had any type of sighting that you can't explain?
No, I've never really had anything that really puzzled me. And people say, well, why are you into this then? Um, because I'm fascinated with the possibility, in addition to the astronomy aspect, and that's just one possibility with regard to UFOs. I mean, I was also part of the Folklore Studies Association of Canada, looking at UFOs as part of a popular mythology and part of our quest for understanding who we are in the universe. But also, I've given lectures in to departments of religious studies. I've had interesting discussions with people in engineering fields, and I'm going to be judging a science fair in a few weeks. And so,
Wow.
it's for me, it's more important to engage people in the discussions of possibilities. Regardless of whether you believe that UFOs exist or not, whether there's aliens out there or not, even just talking about it and getting into some fascinating realms of discourse, I think really opens your mind, because we happen to live in the Steven Spielberg generation, or I guess maybe we're in the James Cameron generation now, where you can go to a movie and turn on the TV and see aliens pictured and conceive of travel between the stars. So it's getting quite commonplace. And the fact is that the study of UFO reports is really the foundation upon all of that, and we use it very easily in everyday conversation and papers and books and magazines and all that sort of stuff. But the reality is, without the UFO reports, we don't have any connection to that. And that's why I think it's important to look at the serious side of ufology in the reports themselves.
Yes, and I do want to talk about the reports that you sent over to the University of Manitoba, or
Hmm.
and we will talk about that in just a minute. But I did want to ask this question from a listener before I forgot, and you were off the show, and I remember next week. So this is Libertus. It's kind of a long-winded question, but Libertus asks the following: I have recently learned you are Canada's representative to the Five Continents Forum, other than their articles of association, which are available on the internet, and the fact that it is being funded by China. Very little information is known about the organization other than their first meeting that was held in 2018 in Moscow, Russia. Would you please tell us about the organization, how many countries it involves, and what its goals are? There's very little information in the U.S., according to him.
Right. Well, the Five Continents group has met twice. The first one was some time ago in China. The most recent one was in Moscow. I was invited to go. Unfortunately, at the last minute, I was unable to go. And the idea is to create a scientific forum bringing together some experts from the various countries to engage a little bit more and try and hammer out what's really going on from a scientific standpoint. I know that Bill Chalker from Australia went to the first one. In fact, we discussed about going to the Moscow one. He wasn't able to go as well. But there are a number of people involved. And I have to be honest, since I didn't go to the Moscow one, I don't know much about what was discussed there. But I think it's a really good opportunity for scientists and experts from around the globe to get together. I mean, we talk about MUFON conferences and the UFO Congress every year. But just imagine if you could get together the UFO experts from literally all the continents on Earth, just to talk a little bit and share information. That's very ambitious, and I'm not even sure of who's funding this. But it's quite an ambitious project, and I look forward to knowing more about it in some of the future meetings. That's about all I know.
Wow. Yeah, that is interesting. I had never even heard about it until this listener wrote me about it. I guess he's been doing a lot of digging, trying to figure out what is going on.
Hmm.
Curious that you don't know who's funding it. That is interesting.
Well, if I had gone to Moscow, I would have found out, but
Yeah.
I never met them.
How about that? Well, I hope it's someone that just has pure interest in no other, motives other than that. Most likely, it sounds like it.
Hmm.
Yeah. So we have about 10 minutes, and I don't think that's going to be long enough to get into the Falcon Lake. But let's talk about what your donation right now. If you Google your name, many articles come up that you donated. I think it's 20,000 UFO reports to the university. So let's talk about that in general. What is that about?
It's actually a little bit more than 20,000. And I mentioned earlier that we're doing the annual Canadian UFO survey.
Yeah.
And we've been doing it for 31 years. And every year there's somewhere around 1,000 UFO reports in Canada alone that are filed. In previous years, as we started, there was a little bit less than that. But in total, there's something like 20,000 UFO reports up until last year. We're a little bit over that now. And in addition, we're going to talk about Falcon Lake, but there's also other government documents that are part of the donation. Behind me, you can see some of my bookshelves, which are starting to get a little bare. You may not be able to tell that from behind me, but I'm also donating my UFO library. And the idea was that I was speaking with somebody at the archives at the University of Manitoba, and I guess I have a bit of a reputation. I do some media, and I'd actually won an award for outreach in education regarding UFOs and astronomy. And because of this, my collection has been quite significant over the years in gathering steam. And the archivist said, well, we have eclectic collections in the University of Manitoba archives, and most people are unaware that the University of Manitoba archives has a huge collection of paranormal artifacts. It has Dan Aykroyd's father, for example, was a ghost hunter and paranormal investigator, and his archives, his funds are in the archives at the University of Manitoba, along with many, many others who are into everything from channeling, seances, electronic voice phenomena, ESP, psychic research. There are spoons bent by some people who are into some of the psychic events around those. There are crystals. There's dowsing. It's a huge collection, and some of that already included a little bit about UFOs. So I thought it seemed a no-brainer to include the UFO stuff in my collection. And so I was approached and I said, what are you going to do with this stuff eventually? And I was wondering about that. 20,000 UFO reports take up a lot of room in my home.
Yeah,
the books actually take up more than one room. And then there's all the other UFO zines and other artifacts that comprise my collection. And for the offer to make them available to people in the future, to researchers, was quite appealing. And there's also a crowdfunding campaign that the university has started up to digitize the collection, so that in the future it would be possible in the same way that some of the other collections, Blue Book at one time was available online, and it's sort of disappeared now, but some people have copies of it. But 20,000 cases plus all the government documents that I've acquired over the years, most of which have not seen the light of day, and the book. So the giving campaign for the crowdfunding is a great opportunity for the average person with an interest in UFOs to help fund UFO research. And literally every dollar counts. And I think I gave you the link to provide to readers of the blog and website if they want to help contribute to this.
Yes, that will be in the show notes for anyone that's listening on the show, and I'll try to get that up on the YouTube channel as well. It may be already, I believe it's actually there right now. So,
okay, good.
Yeah, so that's great. Are you familiar with Dave Marler? He's kind of planning the same type of thing, down the road.
Mm-hmm. I've met Dave, and I'm a little bit further along than him in age as well, so I have a little bit more than in the collection. But it's it's the type of thing where by golly, to be able to look at this stuff online, and
Oh, yeah.
I mean, a lot of the Canadian National Archives have had its UFO archives available in physical form. Right from the start. I mean, there's disclosure in Canada is a real nothing, because we've always had access to the UFO files from the National Research Council and the Royal Canadian Air Force and so forth. Simply, they were in the National Archives, and the National Archives of Canada have digitized 8,000 or 9,000 documents in their collection. So this is a little bit larger than their collection, and 20,000 UFO reports is actually larger than Blue Book. So when this is finally made available, it's going to be an interesting resource.
Yes, and as I believe I mentioned to Jordan, maybe it was off air, I don't even know, but once this is in the hands of a university, it's going to be taken care of.
Absolutely, it's in climate-controlled conditions
That's right.
rather than a dusty basement.
Yeah, so you get your basement back.
I do. Yeah.
You're going to have to make what do they call it, a man cave or something out of it.
Yes, absolutely.
UFO free.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's very, very kind of you to offer that, and it'll be a legacy also, in tribute to all your work that you've done. Now, have you collected these UFO reports basically for Canada?
Yeah, this is all Canada. I mean, if you can just imagine, these cases are all Canada. I do have some cases from the United States. I did actually investigate in North Dakota and Minnesota personally, since they're actually fairly close. And then I have some files on some of the more noted cases. I have a file on Roswell, for example, and Kecksburg and Cash Landrum and things like that. So, I mean, I do have some reports, but this is mostly a Canadian collection. Stan Friedman, after his passing, his family donated his huge amount of archives to the province of New Brunswick, so it's in government archives. And there are other archives that have been developed over the years. So James MacDonald has his papers elsewhere. So this is a fine tradition, and I think it's preserving this information so it simply doesn't get lost.
That's right, and digitizing. I think that's
digitizing.
That's so important for anyone that is curious and wants to look. We just have a couple minutes to break. What, besides the Falcon Lake incident, what are some of the really big cases that really stand out in the history of Canada since you've been at this?
Well, I mean, a lot of cases have popped up over the past 40 years or so. But, I mean, I have to mention some of the other cases besides Falcon Lake. Shag Harbor, which also took place in 1967, the object that was supposed to fall into the harbor. I was just over there last year for their conference, and there's a museum, there's a commemoration sign and a guidepost right at the shore. Some of the witnesses are still around, and I had an opportunity to speak with them at the conference. And they're going to be doing it again every year to have something. Falcon Lake has something like this as well. And then across Canada, there have been a number of other cases. I know there's a conference about the 1980, 1990 anniversary of the Hotel Bonaventure report in Montreal. There's a conference actually happening in Montreal this year for the celebration, and this is a case, if people aren't familiar, where dozens and dozens of people, including members of the police, there's some newspapers, reporters, they took photographs of an object that was hovering or appeared to hover over up on the top floor of a high-rise hotel right in downtown Montreal. And to many, this has not been satisfactorily explained as well. So, there's some fascinating cases out there, and it's just a matter of digging out the information and trying to understand what was going on.
Oh, excellent. So, looks like we're just about ready to go into break, so we might as well hit that now. And when we come back, we will talk about the Falcon Lake incident. During the break, I want to speak to you too, because I always get a UFO event confused, and I want to sort that out with you, and maybe we can talk about that as well. In about a half hour in or so, we'll start taking calls. So, all right, everyone. So we're going to go hit the break right now, and we'll be right back right after these messages.
See you soon.
All right, welcome back. My guest this evening is Chris Rutkowski, and up in Canada, and we are talking Canada UFOs. And there are a lot of great cases. And Chris, thank you for helping me with the case. I was having trouble remembering exactly, but you said it was in the Yukon, 1996, Fox Lake. The thing that struck me was, and I remember either reading about it or I must have read about it, that the witnesses saw this a long way away, and it was huge, and there were many independent witnesses, but they didn't all like get together. So there were separate accounts of this incident. Can you talk about it?
Right. A really great Canadian researcher by the name of Martin Jasek, as part of UFO BC, investigated. He had just heard something in the wind, literally, that something may have been seen, and talked to some radio personalities, and they said, well, yeah, we think it was a tip that happened somewhere in Fox Lake. He ended up going from town to town to town, talking to people if they had seen this object. And what emerged was a very, very consistent series of reports of an object that in 1996 slowly and ponderously made its way along the length of a lake. There's a highway that goes along the lake, between the lake and the mountain. And he found these, he did what was called a dig in ufology, where you go into an area that you suspect there are some reports, and just persistently talk to people at gas stations and corner stores and bars until you find people. And he found originally 31, and I think over the course of a few more years he found in the 40s. And these people never spoke to one another. He had to track them down. Families were living, several miles away from one another, and never thought to tell anybody about what they had seen. They all painted a similar picture of a very large object with windows that moved from the lake over the mountain. And there were two cousins, if I'm not mistaken, who had seen this object simultaneously from two different directions. They were driving in two different vehicles. One was ahead of the other. The further ahead one stopped his truck, got out and watched this thing fly directly overhead, and described a very, very round object with a bright light on the bottom, like the classic saucer. But his cousin, who was about a mile or two away, saw it, from a different angle. He saw it from an oblique angle and saw what he described as a large disc-shaped object, or a long cigar-shaped object, passing directly over his brother's vehicle. So that's quite interesting. Now, there have been some attempts to explain this, and there's no question that some of the reports do seem to coincide with the entry of a Russian rocket booster about the same time. The trouble is that we do have some disparate reports that don't seem to line up with that. So what do you do with those, especially since the witnesses, are adamant that what they saw was something completely different? It would be very strange for a UFO to be flying underneath the descent of a rocket booster, but it adds up to a very fascinating exercise in UFO research and investigation. So, Martin did a fantastic job, and ranks as one of the best investigative pieces I've ever seen. In fact, he produced a report on this, which was given to the Yukon government, which tabled it in their one of their sessions. And discussed it. The Yukon Minister, I think, of the Environment, discussed it within council. So, here we have a government that took an interest in a UFO case that happened in Canada in 1996.
That is amazing. I can't think of any other case where someone basically had boots on the ground, like, as they say, and actually knocking on doors or whatever this guy did, gas stations, corner stores, bars, as you say, and actually took on a case like that before having a primary witness. I mean, that's a leap of faith right there. And It sounds very effective, and
Yeah,
especially
we
to get
don't.
all these different, people saying the same thing. Doesn't sound like a rocket booster.
No, but we it's something that's not in ufology anymore. It used to be in the 50s and 60s. It was actually common practice to do that, where you suspected that if a UFO was seen, point A over here, then somebody over there, probably did see it as well. It's just a matter of talking to people until you found one. And in Canada in 1975, 76. I went off into the countryside, knocking on doors, trying to find
Wow.
people who had seen some UFOs during a wave that was going on at that time. So it used to be quite common. You don't hear about it as much anymore, but it still is a really good practice for UFO investigators.
Now, besides Shag Harbor, are there a number of cases that involve the police department in one way or another? Are the Royal Canadian or the Mounties?
Mounted Police, RCMP, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. In fact, there's quite a few cases that involve the RCMP as well as the Royal Canadian Air Force as well. Mentioned Shag Harbor. There was a case in let's see, Rivers, Manitoba, in the 1960s, and more recently, we've had reports where Mounties were witnesses to some cases in the 1970s and into the 1980s, and we do have copies of those reports. It's also true that in 1967, if you can believe 1967, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police helped investigate the first crop circles. They didn't start in Britain. They actually started elsewhere, and there are actually photographs of these impressions in the fields that were produced by the RCMP, and the RCMP Crime Lab also took a look at it. So the Canadian military and police have a long history of looking into this. In fact, part of what I have in my collection are the reports from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who were charged with investigating UFOs up until about 1995.
Wow.
And so a lot of the cases we get are courtesy of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, because what happened is that the Canadian, what was Canadian Space Agency, was then called the National Research Council, Hertzberg Institute of Astrophysics, and they were interested in collecting meteorites. And well, you need to have reports of meteors and shooting stars and things falling through the sky in order to find meteorites. So the scientists decided, well, there's all these reports of UFOs that are probably meteors. Let's get the RCMP to talk to the witnesses, and we'll find the meteorites. That actually did happen. It did work in a few instances. But most of the reports they got, of course, were not meteors. They were reports of disc-shaped objects that were certainly not meteors. And those fell into what was called the non-meteoric sightings file, which was collected in Ottawa, in the Hertzberg Institute of Astrophysics. I visited with the office a number of times. And those are the reports that made it into the National Canadian Archives. So, police have had a good history of being involved in this.
Wow, very interesting. Before we get into the Falcon Lake incident, there's one other case that just came to mind with me, that there was a mounted, what are they called? Royal Canadian
Mounties, yeah.
Mounties, yeah. And this was, I believe, a single officer that saw this cigar-shaped thing at a distance and used his binoculars. And now he's, I think he's called like the Raccoon Whisperer.
The Raccoon Whisperer.
Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. Yeah.
That was Clarenville in Newfoundland I'm trying to think when that was now. I think back in the 60s as well, or maybe 70s. Anyways, yeah, he saw this object, watched it progress over Newfoundland, and was very adamant. This is where he says, if you don't believe me, you don't believe me, but I'll stake my badge on the line, and he did. And he has since retired and actually has YouTube videos now where he is surrounded by raccoons. He has this thing
right.
where raccoons want to come and spend time with him. So from from aliens to raccoons. It's not that much of a stretch, I suppose.
And I know he went. There was a lot of stress in his life because of that situation or something. I remember something about that. If I
Yeah, he took a
recall,
lot of ribbing. He took a lot of ribbing
yeah,
from his colleagues and from the general public. But as I said, he insisted, if you don't believe me, you don't believe me. But this is what happened.
yeah, yeah. And I think it was a cigar shape, but very very interesting case as well. All right, so let's get into the Falcon Lake, and I want to hear all about that incident. We do have a lot of new listeners, and a lot of people are not familiar at all with it. So can you go over that if you would, please?
Sure. And as an intro to this, I have to say, if you don't know the Falcon Lake UFO case, you're missing something, because this is a case that has everything you would possibly want in a UFO case. Happened a while ago, 1967. As a matter of fact, we celebrated the 50th anniversary at the site with the witness's son, and there's been some commemorative events. The Canadian government recognizes this as a real event.
Wow, that's
but
amazing.
back in May of 1967, a fellow named Stefan Michalak was doing some amateur rock hounding, some prospecting. He was, his background actually is in the military. As an immigrant from Eastern Europe, and in May of 1967, had driven out, had taken a bus out to this little town called Falcon Lake, which is about an hour north of the American border and about an hour east of the city of Winnipeg. And he traveled there because he, had staked some claims, and he was curious about the rock formations out there. And he entered the bush about 6 o'clock in the morning and packed himself a lunch. It's very rugged territory, very, very rocky. Very, very few people in that particular area of the Great Canadian Shield. And was poking around, and then around lunchtime, literally around noon, he had stopped for lunch, had set up his pack on a large rock, and there was he was on a ridge, and below the ridge was a pond which some geese were swimming. All of a sudden, the geese took flight, and he was concerned that there was a bear around, because there are bears around there, and he thought maybe there was one nearby. He looked around, couldn't see any bears, but in the sky there were two what he described as cigar shapes that were very, very bright white in color. They seemed to be descending. One stayed fairly high. The other one seemed to descend and land not far from where he was. He crouched down behind a bush, and this object, which turned out not to be cigar-shaped at all, but a disc-shaped, a Hollywood-style flying saucer, it was changing color from white to yellow to orange to red as it cooled down. Eventually, it was the color of burnished steel, as he described it. And it descended. It was 35 feet in diameter, 12 feet high, dome on top, lights coming from the top. And this thing was sitting about 150 yards away. He was watching it for some time, and because of his military background, he was convinced that this was some sort of physical vehicle, a test aircraft of some sort. This was just at the beginning of the Apollo program, and he thought maybe this was a moon lander that got off course as it was being tested by the Americans. Watched for some time. Suddenly a door opened in the side of this thing. A very, very small door, but through the door he could see some bright lights, and he could hear some very high-pitched voices, and he was convinced that this was an American craft then. So he stood up, walked towards it, and shouted, and you can just imagine, "Come on, Yankee boys, I'll give you a hand fixing your broken-down flying machine," because he figured they were stopped for repairs. Well, as he's walking towards, the voices stopped, and he realized, oh, maybe not American. So he happened to be multilingual. So he called out in other languages, including Russian.
Wow.
By this time, he was already touching the side of this, touched the side of this thing with his rubberized glove, which he had on to protect his hands from the sharp rocks. His rubberized glove melted because the side of this thing was too hot. The door shut, the entire thing rotated so that there was sort of an exhaust vent right in front of him, and a blast of hot gas came out, hit him in the chest, knocked him down, set his clothes on fire, set fire to pine needles and leaves that were around. The thing took off, and that's the last he saw of it. But he tore off his shirt, stamped out the shirt as best he could, and he was very dizzy. He was vomiting. Whatever the chemical was in this gas was making him very, very ill. He eventually made it back to civilization, was taken to a hospital where he was examined and found to have first and second degree burns. In addition, on his lower chest, he had red marks in a pattern that corresponded, according to him, to this exhaust vent, the holes on this exhaust vent. And then the story came out, and the case was investigated by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Royal Canadian Air Force. It was even part of Blue Book. It's actually in the Condon Report. And we have, remarkably, all the well, I'm not going to say all, there's probably a few others, but we have 300 pages of documents from these various agencies, the transcripts of the interviews that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police did with him, the records that show that they visited with the hotel owner of the hotel he stayed in overnight, the housekeeping staff. They checked with the bar to find out whether he was drinking himself silly the night before. There's documents between members of Parliament, the Canadian politicians, talking about this because it was quite a big thing. And then we have the opportunity of speaking, when I opened the case again in the 1980s, I knew the family because it turns out that the witness's son lived literally 2 blocks away from me. And I used to hang out with them and ride bicycles when I was a kid and things like that. And so after my investigations in Manitoba, I thought, well, I want to know more about this case. Ended up talking with the family who had actually turned away media because they were sick and tired of being made fun of, and the people were always showing up and not really telling the story properly. So a few years ago, the witness's son and myself wrote a book titled When They Appeared, giving the story of not only the witness's words, because there was a pamphlet which was produced describing what happened in his words, but also from the son's words, my investigation, and then the later fallout, plus the government docs and photographs. Now, I'm not done yet. There was actually radioactive material found at the site by the Royal Canadian Air Force and the RCMP. They had actually considered closing off the area to the public because of a perceived danger. And then a year later, radioactive material was found in the crack in a rock over which this object had hovered. That material was found to be almost pure silver that was radioactive, and it was tested by a number of institutes, the University of Chicago, University of Illinois as well, University of Arizona. The Lorenzens had it for APRO for a while. It's been tested by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police themselves. And very recently, we still have one of these pieces which we tested at a materials institute to verify that this was in fact pure silver. So we have testimony from the witness who only passed away just before the turn of the millennium. So I spoke with him at length. The witness's family. We have the documents from the official investigators. We have the Condon's notes, actually, not Condon himself, but one of his investigators' notes on the case. Michael Sword's notes on the case. Plus, we have the physical evidence. We have the medical records. He actually went down to the Mayo Clinic to be tested down there, not only physiologically, but psychologically. In fact, we have the evaluation by the Mayo Clinic psychiatrist who said this is not somebody who makes up stories. Can you think of any other case that has all this evidence? Probably not, even Roswell.
Wow, amazing. Now, last time I talked about this incident on the show, someone wrote me and said, "Oh, you don't know that was a hoax." Has there been like a rumor that's going around there, and if so, what is their, what's their standby of what they're considering a hoax?
quite interesting because the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Royal Canadian Air Force both issued reports that unequivocally stated that they label this case unexplained. And you don't get that too often. And the only other possible explanation, I mean, there's two possible explanations. Either it happened as he said, or it's completely made up. But I guess you have to figure out, if he made it up, how would you manufacture some of this material, getting the radiation at the site? This was actually melted silver that was found in a rock, in a crack in the rock. And you can actually get to the site now. In fact, you have to take a horseback ride to get there, because you could walk in, but it would take you quite some time across swamps. But the best way in right now is through a 45 to an hour horseback ride over some pretty rugged territory. Not for the amateur horseback rider, by the way. And so you know, to manufacture this, and then you have to consider the fact that the RCMP and RCAF took the matter very seriously and didn't charge him with mischief. The story was very, very consistent. He did not change his story. You know, all the years that followed. I know that some hardcore debunkers and skeptics, you know, just dismiss it out of hand because, I mean, why not? But you know, there's a lot of evidence here in this particular case, and a lot of the things that were said about him were simply untrue. For example, the bartender at the hotel told the Royal Canadian Air Force that the witness had you know, bought many drinks when he showed up at 8:30 in the evening, and he drank until closing time or something like that. Well, it turns out that that's completely impossible, because the bus that brought him to that town, where the hotel was, didn't get in till 9:30, and the house cleaning staff said, well, there weren't any bottles in his room, and you know, there simply wasn't any way that he was drunk. And I guess the other thing is, if he you know, really was drunk, many people saw him leave the hotel, many people saw him coming and going. You know, the story itself doesn't make any sense, and being drunk alone wouldn't allow, you know, some of this evidence to be procured and make up such an incredible story. You know, it's that in itself doesn't you know, explain anything. It's a very fascinating case, and you know, in the book, and even the witness himself never talked in terms of aliens. He never talked in terms of little green guys. He thought it was a physical, you know, space landing craft produced by Americans or Russians or something. And in our book, we simply state we leave this case open. You know, simply dismissing it as a hoax is insufficient, but we also don't have any proof that this was actually you know, an alien spacecraft. It's a fascinating case study. And one of the reasons we told the story in this form was to get the information out, and all of this material, you know, the documents, the government documents, from the RCMP and the RCAF, plus our own investigation files, plus letters on file from UFO investigators themselves, the doctors' reports, and so forth. I've turned that over already to the University of Manitoba archives, and it's in the process of digitizing that as well, so that that'll be available for researchers to take a look at as well. So I don't know. It's a great case, and has all the elements you want in a UFO case. But if that's not enough, hey, that's fine.
Right now, I'm putting up on YouTube for those people over there. You can see the grid marks that this whatever it was left. Looks very, very painful. And and what type of health issues did he have because of this? Did he have any?
Well, he did. In fact, he was very, very nauseous, lost a lot of weight, couldn't hold food down. His son said that there was this odor in his bedroom, because he eventually was released from the hospital and he was sent home. There was this odor that he said was like rotten eggs, sulfur that was emanating from his body itself. Wow. He was given blood tests. There were there's no question that he had these marks. In fact, this grid mark thing he described as his buttons, because they healed, but you could actually feel the scar tissue under his chest and stomach, right just under the skin. He had a series of fainting spells. In fact, the Mayo Clinic suggested there was some sort of toxin that was in his system that needed to eventually work its way out. And over the course of many years, he had relapses. His allergic reaction, his body swelled up, passed out, and so forth. He was an otherwise healthy man and had never been sick a day in his life.
And by the people that interviewed him and talked to him, after this happened, what was his? You said that he never thought it was, never mentioned alien or whatever, but did he go his entire life, trying to figure out what this thing was, or did he just try to move on from that? Do you know?
No, he did in fact try to move on. He drastically cut down on his time going into the bush. He again, like so many people, said, if people don't believe me, they don't believe me. But this is what happened to me. In fact, it took a great deal of arm twisting to convince him and his wife and his son to go on Unsolved Mysteries. NBC flew myself and them down to their set to do the recreation for Unsolved Mysteries, the original version with Robert Stack.
Oh yeah.
And I think it was redone and re-edited. They really didn't do very many more interviews after that. I know it was done on A&E's Unexplained and a few others, which we participated in. But they really, really pulled back and didn't want to talk about things very much after that, because in our book, the witness's son described how he was bullied at school. Your dad saw an alien ship, that sort of stuff. And he was treated very, very badly. The family, had a lot more to lose than gain from telling the story. It did not gain any money financially. It was truly an amazing experience to read what the son wrote in our book, and to hear him talk about it himself. In fact, there's a very powerful moment, and I think I have it on one of my YouTube channels, where the son had never gone out to the site in all the 50 years since this happened. And he went out with us by horseback for the 50th anniversary. And one of the things he had was a copy of a map that his father had drawn of the lay of the land where this thing happened. And he had that copy of the map with him when we went to the site. And when we were standing at the location where this happened, he was almost brought to tears, because the map corresponded completely with what his father said it looked like at that time. And he looked into the camera, he said, he was telling the truth. This actually happened, and it happened right here.
Wow.
It's very, very profound.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, you mentioned that this thing rotated, and it was probably almost like an exhaust. Was there any type of loud noise, or do you talk about that at all?
There was a rush of wind. No rocket exhaust or anything like that. In fact, he had heard while this thing was landed, he described the sound as if a bellows was expelling and bringing in air while it was on the ground. So those are the types of things. And he said there was a smell like a burning electrical motor. All these little tiny details that add up to a really profound experience, and a detail with some details that really add up to something that suggests there really was something physical there.
Now, what about landing gear or impressions or anything like that? Was there any of that ever discussed?
He actually never saw any. In fact, there's some discussion about whether it was actually landed or just hovering above. Where this took place was on a pretty solid rock.
I see.
A rock face, and so there wouldn't be anything, any landing pad that could have made a dent or anything like that.
Right. Did he, after this incident happened, did he still prospect like he was doing at that case, or was this something that
Not
kind
as
of,
much.
yeah,
Not as much. In fact, his wife told him, "You're done." Basically, you're done.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
especially with the health reasons. That's really something.
especially, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I'm sorry, you may have already mentioned this, but was there any radioactivity?
Well, there was radioactivity found at the site by the RCAF and the RCMP. And then a year later, these radioactive metal pieces were found at the site. Um, the radioactivity that was found originally may have been due to radon, may have been due to some natural uranium pitch blende. That's one possibility. But there was definitely radioactivity above normal background that was found at the site. But the radioactivity that was found on this silver was definitely anomalous, and that's still a matter of debate.
Would you consider this case? You said it has basically all the bells and whistles. Is this like Canada's Roswell in a way?
I think it's definitely Canada's Roswell, but I would say better than Roswell because the United States government doesn't acknowledge that Roswell happened, whereas the
Yeah.
Canadian government, does. We know where this happened to a precise location. We've GPS marked it very recently. We actually have the physical evidence in our hands. In fact, I could reach over and touch one of them right now.
Oh, can you
Uh,
put something in front of the camera?
I can move away for a second. Is that
That's
okay?
fine. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, vamp just a second here.
Yeah. Yeah. No problem. So my guest, Chris Rutkowski, he is off to get some evidence. We're going to see this actually on YouTube. So if you're listening to this as a podcast, I can't tell you exactly how many minutes in.
Good,
But,
good job vamping. Okay, so I have it. I have this here, and it's in a glass case because it is still slightly radioactive. I'm
Oh,
just
wow.
taking it out right now.
No lead, huh?
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's double lined. I'm just taking it out, and here we go.
Oh, I think I saw this online.
This
Yes, I
is
saw this online.
it.
Yeah.
This is radioactive. It's almost pure silver. It's actually quite heavy, um, and it's been tested by a number of laboratories, and
And it's
it's
pure
definitely been
silver.
pure silver. Yeah, subject to a lot of heat. You can definitely tell that we've had it.
Yeah.
We put it on electron microscope last year, as a matter of fact.
Wow. So there's
So
nothing anomalous about it. It is just the element of silver, basically.
yes, in fact, it's very well. That's what's anomalous. Actually, it's almost pure silver.
Yeah.
Uh, and that in itself is a little bit strange.
Unless it comes directly from the center of a vein, um, you know.
Well, no, this is more commercial grade silver. It's actually very, very pure silver.
Wow.
Veins wouldn't be
Like
all that
99%. You know, that sterling silver
99.99.
is, anywhere from, 9.2, 92.5% of sterling silver.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so
and
this is higher than that.
this is the lab reports verify that this is definitely high quality silver.
Amazing. And it was basically just sitting there on that location.
Well, not sitting. It was they had to dig it out of the
Oh, they had
out
to
of the
dig it.
ground.
Yeah. Okay,
Dig
that's
it out.
right. You said
And
that.
and
Yeah.
I guess if you assume, I want to believe that this was left behind by a saucer of some sort, you have to wonder, what would saucers drip silver or something? I mean, that in itself doesn't make any sense. In fact, what's fascinating about this case, it really makes you have more questions than answers.
Yeah.
And as I say, it's more of a case study of a case. And for me, that's part of the challenge to try and understand what really happened.
Yes. Yeah. So really amazing. Now there was another. You're talking about the government actually, admitting that you have a saucer. They did also in Shag Harbor. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, there are government documents regarding Shag Harbor. I think there's only 5 or something like that, whereas with Falcon Lake we have 3 or 400, something like that. But the five really are quite interesting. They show that there's something really did happen. There was some discussion at a high level, and the Canadian Navy was encouraged to go in and try and recover whatever it was that was under the water. And there are many, many fascinating reports like that. And I'm, as a matter of fact, one of my next projects is going and do some forensic ufology, if you can believe that, trying to go back and look at some cold cases and the government records themselves.
Excellent. Well, we are open for calls if anyone would like to call in. And that phone number, if you're over at KGRA Radio, that phone number is 855-472-5483. That number's up on the screen if you're on YouTube. So we do have a call screener. Race will be standing by. So you're welcome to call in. The line is open. This is really a great talk. It's one of it's been a really fun show for me so far. And let's talk about some of the other incidents that you find have a lot of merit. Because from what I understand, tell me if I'm wrong, but I have heard over the years that you are very, very cautious, and you're a good skeptic. You're not a debunker, but you're a skeptic, and you really like to present things that are solid if you're going to get involved at all.
Well, yeah. In fact, hardcore believers are convinced that I'm a skeptic and a debunker, whereas debunkers and the real skeptics, like Schaefer and Phil Play. Phil Play has nothing good to say about me. Let me just say that. I'm too much of a believer. So I'm sitting on the fence, and those pointy picket fences are really tough to sit on. They're really painful. But I have the an astronomy background, so I know the likelihood of stellar evolution and other planets and life elsewhere. I have a good knowledge of what's in the sky, and most of the reports that I get of Venus these days, I can just say to the people, "You're watching Venus. I know it's very bright right now, but that's what it is." Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I like to say that. Don't believe the believers necessarily, but be skeptical of skeptics. And the other thing I often say in my lectures is that, if the UFO phenomenon has a physical component, or perhaps a psychological or a sociological component, in any of those categories, it's worth a study and investigation. And there are so many master's theses and PhD theses being done on UFOs right now. Over the years, there's been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And, just over the past, 6 months, I've had a half dozen doctoral and master's thesis students from all across North America, asking for help in doing some of the research into their UFO topics. So there's serious scientific research that's being done out there. But at the same time, we're bombarded all the time with pop ufology, mysterious drones and videos that appear on YouTube with some really, doubtful, dubious provenance and things like that. Plus a lot of things that are being talked about at conferences now about, how aliens fly, use consciousness and ESP to pilot their planes. And, we've got 76 varieties of aliens from this planet, and some are reptilian and some are insectoid and whatever. Yeah. The reality is we don't know. We simply don't have good information on that. And that's sheer speculation, which is fun. But at the same time, is there some meat down there? Because one of the things I do is I liaise with the scientific community in order to talk about UFOs with scientists. And you'd be surprised how many are willing to talk as long as you don't wear tinfoil hats and have pyramids on your heads.
Yeah, or put their name in print, maybe. Some of them are okay with that. Now, back in 2013, the Kepler. Basically, as far as the Earth-like possibilities of planets within just our Milky Way, could be as high as 40 billion. I like to ask people that know a little bit about astronomy, that have a interest in this topic, this question, just to hear what you would say about it. And that is, why would we be so special if there is a possibility of that many Earth-like planets with life, just say intelligent life, if there's a fraction of them that could have intelligent life on it, that's still billions. And so why would we be so popular that we'd be visited, especially as much as we're being visited? Just your opinion.
Well, the Drake equation, which calculates some upper and lower bounds for the number of habitable planets with intelligent life, it's really an approximation, and it's true. There will be, given the size of the galaxy, there will be, many, many planets out there that are Earth-like and supporting life and possibly have intelligent life, but not all that many. And the other problem is that the distance between them is going to be very, very, very large. I mean, even the nearest star, Proxima Centauri is, 3.5 light years away at its closest, and so. That's pretty decent, and James Cameron is telling us all about it in his movies that are upcoming, and it's possible that there could be a moon like that around one of the planets around the Centauri system. But it's really tough to travel between the stars. And why would we be special? Well, probably because of water. Water actually is very, very rare, and carbon-based life. Even though it's possible to have silicon-based life, carbon-based life seems to be the easiest to produce. And for that, you need liquid water in the right temperature zone and so forth. So it's the fact that you need water in an atmosphere that's not too reducing. Suggests that we are fairly unique. There's certainly a possibility, I know Seth Shostak has talked about this, that we'll probably discover life or have verification of life elsewhere in the universe, probably within 5 or 10 years.
Yes, that's just so we can get funding.
Yeah, but those are going to be like bacteria or fungus or something like that. We're not talking advanced intelligent life. Yeah. Those are going to be very, very rare. And in fact, you may have heard the analogy that, even to produce the DNA molecule is so radically difficult and requires so many steps that it's the equivalent of saying that a tornado came through a junkyard and left behind a fully formed Jeep Wrangler. That's as unlikely as as the odds have it, and yet we're here, so we know that it's possible. So it's either very.
Pardon me. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just say it just makes you really appreciate the likelihood and the numbers involved. And
that may also make you think, well, maybe life didn't originate here. Maybe the panspermia, theory is. Maybe life was started elsewhere, but that first spark of life, what the heck was it, and how did it happen? That type of thing. It's all fascinating, and there's so many ways that we could not be here. Like, for instance, if we didn't have a moon, perhaps we wouldn't be here. If we didn't have extinction events, most likely we wouldn't be here. There's just it's just an amazing thing how it all fell into place. And
yeah. Neil deGrasse Tyson has a great series on the universe is trying to kill you, because it's just impossible to fathom exactly how we could have got here given all the odds stacked against us.
Exactly. Again, the line's open. I thought we'd get some calls tonight. We usually do. 855-472-5483. They probably just love what you're saying and want to have you keep talking. That's maybe what it is. But we have a screener standing by waiting to take your calls. And that is available.
Let me tell you that I am working on. I mentioned I've done the Canadian UFO survey for quite a number of years. Yes. I'm currently working on the 2019 version of the Canadian UFO survey. We're always a year out because it takes some time to gather the data. I have assistants who are helping enter the information into a database. They look at every UFO report that's filed or given to organizations, and the reports come from organizations like MUFON, like UFO Info. There's a number of Quebec organizations from UFO BC, but also from Transport Canada, the equivalent of the FAA, from other official sources and reports that come directly to us. So, and certainly we're going through social media now for cases. A lot of things are reported simply on YouTube with somebody's video. And so we're looking at all these sources to get a true picture, not just one organization's analysis, but a true picture of all the organizations that are accepting UFO reports. NUFORC, Peter Davenport's group is part of this as well. And as I mentioned, over the course of the time, we've noticed somewhere around 1,000 cases. I've heard and seen some reports saying that the numbers of UFO reports are skyrocketing and going up because of all the interest in the subject. We're not seeing that reflected in the actual data. I can tell you that right now. Our 2019 report will not be available until probably at least another month or two. There's a lot of work that has to be done in terms of the analysis. But we're not seeing big increases in UFO reports. In fact, we've noticed a significant dip this year. It'll be we're trying to figure out exactly how much that dip is going to be, but it's a significant decrease from years past. We've had a very good plateau of high levels of reports. The UFO reports have generally increased with time, up until a peak around 2012, I think, and then it's sort of stayed fairly high throughout the teens, and as we reached 1920, we've noticed a decrease in the number of reports that are being filed right across the board through all organizations. So why this is so, we're not sure, but we won't have the actual data for another few months, and I would say, despite what you hear, we just don't have the information yet.
Wow. I do want to apologize to the people that are trying to call in, evidently. There is an issue. The phone will not ring. So, Race, if you're listening, my phone just went dead. I tried to connect with you, Race. But anyway, maybe that
obviously
can be fixed.
The government doesn't want us to know.
That's exactly what it is. So I will, in this particular case, if people want to call in, I'm going to change the number up there. You may call in until this gets fixed, that is. You may call in at 603-967-4030, and I'll put that number up. That's 603-967-4030, and I will take your call.
That's Martin's personal cell phone. Use it as much as you want.
You can't believe, it's not, but you can't believe how many people do call when the show is not live. Constantly call. But that is, I will thank you for mentioning that. So I remember to say that is a show-only call. And so we will take the call. I'll take that call over here at Skype. And again, that's 603-967-4030. I'm sure we'll get the other phone line all straightened out before the next show. Unfortunately, not now. So again, that number is up on the screen, 603-967-4030. Go ahead and call in if you'd like. And we should see some calls come in. And we don't have a whole lot of time. We have, looks like about 7 minutes or so left. So we can only take one call if you'd like to call in. And so 2019, 2018, 2017, somehow I get your, wait a minute, the old phone number's working. Someone's calling in on the old number. And that number just that call just ended. So looks like that line might be working. If someone would like to call over there again, I'll pop that number back. And
I think the button in front of you is for the Iowa caucus. Just want to push that one there.
Now we have someone calling in on my personal line. So here we are. We'll get through this. All right, caller, your first name, where are you calling from? Caller, you there? Let's try this one. Caller, where are you calling from? And your first name? It just keeps hanging up. But sorry, we wouldn't have a show without technical difficulties. And it looks like we have someone over. We have someone ready to go. We have Vince. Vince from Ohio. Welcome to the show, Vince. Can you hear me, Vince?
Vince has vanished.
Vince, are you there? Race, we cannot hear the caller. All right. You know what? I'm just gonna skip calls tonight. I have one more person trying to call here.
This is crazy, Martin. I've got him on. I can hear him. He can hear you.
Okay. Well, we're not hearing him over here. All right, caller, are you there?
I am here.
Speak up if you would.
I'm here. Can you hear me, Martin?
It sounds like you're on a soup can on a string. So we're going to have to pass on the call. Thanks for trying. And okay, we don't want to end the show like this. Caller, welcome to the show. Your first name, where are you calling from? All right, guess what? No more calls.
I'm shutting the phone down.
Yeah, all right.
Shutting the phone
It's
down.
his end.
I'm sorry. People can always check me out on my blog. I think you have a link there. And the Canadian
was on
UFO
his
Survey
end.
site.
Let me see.
Okay, so yeah, go ahead. Give your blog over there, and people can contact Chris that way. I'll just try this call one more time. Caller, your first name, where are you calling from? Nope, no more calls, please. No more calls. Thank you all for trying to get through, and I'm sorry it just didn't work out tonight.
I'm also the admin for UFO Updates, the UFO discussion group in Facebook. So
oh, really?
if you want,
I know that one. That's a good one.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm the admin. I was asked to take it over following the passing of Earl Bruce Knapp, who ran it for many years, and people remember him from.
Oh, I didn't hear
radio.
that he passed.
Yeah. So I'm actually the admin for that. So join UFO Updates and join the discussion. And there's a lot of interesting people on there, trying to keep abreast of UFO news and UFO cases. And in Canada, there's one called UFOs Over Canada. So, the social media is an excellent way to keep in touch with what's going on. And you can even follow me at Ufology Research on Twitter. So there's so much information out there, but I would just urge people to have an open mind, and because it's very important to have an open mind, except not so open that your brains fall out. And there's a lot of gray matter on the sidewalk that you have to step over these days. So try and stay level, and but there's so much cool stuff out there. Just keep an eye out.
Yeah. So I'm just mentioning this again. I'm sorry we're not going to take any more. We're not going to try to take calls. Thank you so much for trying to call, though. We really do appreciate it. And sorry you couldn't get through tonight. So I would like to ask this because you have been at this so long. Do you ever get the burnout with, you've had it, or this is just too much, and, you want to move on and just not look back? Do you ever get that? You seem to have a great attitude.
Well, because I don't have as much invested in it. I'm not trying to prove that aliens are here like so many people. I'm fascinated with the subject. I find it interesting from a number of standpoints. I continually, talk to people about cases. We have the unique opportunity to examine each and every report that is filed in Canada, and we end up following up and talking to very many people. We have, the advantage of looking at all the cases. This is beyond what you hear on TV and on Project Blue Book and all those shows that are mostly fiction. These are the actual cases. This is what people really are reporting, and we share those every year on the Canadian UFO Survey. And we talk about them on Facebook, and I don't do a lot of conferences compared to what a lot of the pop ones do, but I do go to some. And I don't do all that many podcasts, actually. So
yes, I know.
But maybe you actually have to have me back and just do phone calls.
Well, I know it. I actually started bugging you a few years ago because you were on once way back, and then and then we met at the conference. And I would love to have you back on again, though, because this is the type of talking I really enjoy the most, and it's been extremely pleasurable for me.
No, it's a great been on. Thanks.
Yeah. All right, everyone. So anyway, good night, Chris, and thanks so much. And I'm sorry we couldn't take the calls, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks. Good night.
Good night. All right, everyone. So that is it for the show tonight. And next week we will be back with Chuck Zukowski, and I'm glad I didn't get the names confused tonight between Chris Rutkowski and Chuck Zukowski. So he'll be back next week with him. And thanks so much for listening to the show. Anyone can support it. You can go over to Patreon or over to our website. Don't forget to check out the blogs over there. And I do want to thank people that help behind the scenes as well. And remember, everyone, to keep your eyes to the sky.